Welcome, everyone. It's lovely being here with friends and colleagues from across the region, supporting me in carrying the banner. So we're here to have a lovely chat. I have my coffee in hand. It's rather cold here in Cairo, the one day of winter we get. And so I'm very, very, very happy to be joined by some fantastic ladies from across the region that have walked multiple paths of life with so many varied experiences. It's really super exciting. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-panelists, and I'll leave the floor for each one of you to please present yourself as you see best. So I'll start with Amal, partner at 500 Global.
Thank you so much, Dina, and amazing to be among these wonderful women, actually. So Amal Dokhan, I'm a partner at 500 Global. I manage the Sanabel 500 MENA Seed Accelerator. It's a MENA-focused fund that looks into, pre-seed and seed stage. Previous life, it was an ecosystem building. I've been a founder, I've been a marketeer, and I've done so many things in the past 20 years. But I think my biggest joy is to work, with startup founders. And I'm lucky to be exposed to multiple sectors and learn new things every day. So pleased to be with you here today.
Lovely having you, Amal. Helen Uzaizi, founder and CEO of BizWorld.
So today we're talking a bit about challenges. So I do apologize that I don't have my camera on. As a mom, I have a bit of an emergency with one of my children. So that is a very easy way to introduce myself. I do youth entrepreneurship, working with children starting from the age of 7, primarily between 7 and 15. And I've worked in, like Amal, in marketing, but also in fundraising and community development. But I'm very passionate about youth and entrepreneurship. So what better way than to bring the worlds together through BizWorld? I'm based in Dubai and I'm a mother of 2. You might hear their voices along the way at some point as we proceed with today's panel. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Reem, Managing Director, Endeavor Jordan.
Hi, Dina. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. So I run the Endeavor chapter in Jordan, and we're part of a global organization. So Endeavor is mainly concerned with companies at the mature stage. So we support what we call scale-ups with access to capital, markets, and talent primarily. But because we are in Jordan, operating in Jordan, we have to exert extra effort to build local capacities and capabilities. So we have a number of programs that are running as well to help build the pipeline for Endeavor also. So it's very exciting that we get to engage with fantastic and very innovative entrepreneurs at all stages of their maturity and growth levels. Previously, I've been all over. I've worked in the public sector, private sector, and in the donor-funded world. I did a bit of investment banking, export promotion, investment development, did management consulting, and worked as a policy advisor for ministers also. So, but I, finally landed in the entrepreneurial world, and I love it. And I can never see myself leaving this ecosystem. It's full of energy, drive. You're continuously learning new things, repurposing yourself. So I'm happy that at some point I came into it, and I don't see myself ever leaving this sector at all.
I hear you. Last and not least, for sure, Yara Milbes, Global Director of Marketing at Infobip.
Thank you, Dina. Hi, everybody. I am the Global Director of Marketing for Infobip. Infobip is a global, or the world's most connected cloud-based full-stack communication provider. What we do is basically offer services and solutions, a full-stack array of solutions and services for SaaS and CPaaS, enterprise, startups, government, and telecom. That's by profession. By nature or by birth, I'm a techie. I've been working in tech marketing for the past 15 years. It's basically embedded in my DNA. I come from a very long line of tech entrepreneurs. So the first acronyms I learned were actually IBM, and this is not a paid advertisement. I also historically started, scaled, and exited 2 startups. So not just, wasn't only sucked into the corporate world, but I also tried to dabble into the startup ecosystem with its challenges, the bittersweet challenges of startups and the experience that it brings to you. And I'm very glad that I actually went into this because I brought a lot of that experience that is much more accelerated into the corporate world, which I'm currently in. Personally, my motto in life is to pay it forward. This is what I strongly believe in. And I believe that when we make it happen, when we succeed, it is our role to go out there and make it happen for someone else. And that's what I try to deploy my position in leadership specifically to do, is pay it forward for other people and other females specifically in tech to bring them into leadership.
Super. Lovely having you all, ladies, and Helen, hope everything is good and no major catastrophes. So I mean, guys, we all come from such different backgrounds, right? There's the pure techie, the investment bankers, the advisors, the corporate world. And I think Reem has said it perfectly, right? We've somehow all caught a bug of entrepreneurship and have been stuck in it for quite some time. And I think it's quite interesting to see everyone here, because actually the spectrum is huge from Helen, who's actually embedding entrepreneurship at the very early stages and sort of the formation stages of youth, all the way to Reem, that sort of looks at growth stage companies and supports them. And in between, we have Helen, who actually sort of tries to help companies at formation stage to sort of accelerate them, then hand them over to the later stage investors and support institutions similar to Endeavor. And then Yara, you're actually doing it as opposed to all of us who are just preaching, which is also okay. All right. And so how do you feel that all of your collective backgrounds have led and fed to your ability to give back now, as Yara was saying, or your value add now to an entrepreneur? And do you feel that had, like for example, I come from an investment banking world, and my question is, do I think I would have been better support had I been a techie, or do you guys feel that actually being part of the corporate world also has value in terms of how we can support entrepreneurship? So just happy to hear thoughts.
I can chime in here a bit. I mean, I definitely have a strong background in the corporate world, the more structured world of larger corporations. I also sit on the board of a bank in Jordan and other large companies as well that are, let's say, heavily governed, and they have, processes, procedures in place. But I mean, there are definitely many advantages to having that structure, that corporate governance in place, so that you ensure that everything is, everything goes according to the book. But it also inhibits creativity and innovation. And I see this clearly with entrepreneurs. Many of them, they're so much focused initially at the initial stages on their product, the service, the product that they're building, and they completely forget that they're building a business actually around that product, right? So, but at the initial stages, you're excited, you're building that product, you're reaching this market fit, people are excited, they're willing to pay some money for it. But then at the end of the day, you're building a company, you have to manage teams, you have to, look at your audited statements, you have to understand financials, you have to deal with taxes, you have to, deal with the team's psychology, build a culture that's conducive for growth, ensure that your vision is, it moves on and trickles down. So there are so many elements that many entrepreneurs, they don't have that capacity to do it. And we see many of them not stepping aside and allowing others who have that competency to run and manage the day-to-day affair of a business. So at some point, when they start, it's all about the product, but then as they progress in size, they really need to put in the right people to manage the day-to-day affair of the business. So this is one clear thing that I see coming from a corporate world into the entrepreneurial world. But then again, you don't want to kill that innovative spirit and creativity. So you need to have some balance there as well.
So
I always
actually, I want to go from Reem's comments and actually ask both Amal and Yara. So Yara, do you feel that as someone who started or had two companies at an earlier stage or two startups at an earlier stage, that these actually were some of the pitfalls that you wanted that someone earlier on to tell you, you need to sort of manage all those, like sort of do the bed and to hopefully build a house, and you didn't? Do you feel like that is something you felt?
Let me tell you something. Being an entrepreneur requires a real discipline, right? You need to be disciplined because there's the lack of, like Reem already put it, there's a lack of structure. You're building that structure and you need discipline. And the way I saw it is that when people ask me, what was your experience like? I always answer, this was the most expensive business course I've ever taken in my life. It's like graduating from Harvard Business School. It's because you have to be the jack of all, the master of none, the jack of all. You sacrifice not only your money, specifically if it's a self-funded startup, you sacrifice your time, you sacrifice your relationships, because you are always in the back of your head, you're thinking, what should I have done better? How could I have done this better? Maybe I should do more research. Maybe I should reach out to another person who would help me out. It's also the skill that is required is specifically for people who, and I speak for myself, I'm an introvert, although many people who know me would find this shocking, but I have polished extrovert skills. So it was very difficult for me in the beginning because I had to do the asking myself. I had to go out and ask for money, ask for support, ask for mentorship. Yep. So it got me out of my shell. Whereas in the corporate world, this is sort of, I wouldn't say handed over to you, but you're this sheltered environment where things are, the processes are there. It's a route. Yeah. Exactly. You have that frame that you work within. So my experience in the startups, I would say, has immensely helped me in my corporate career, right? Because I took that, for lack of a better word, and I say this in the positive notation, is that I took that aggressiveness that I had built for myself and the self-starter, self-learning kind of thinking into the corporate world and translated it into solution finding and problem solving. Whereas in the corporate world, people mostly who start and finish in the corporate world, it's part of a group thinking where in a startup, it's mostly you are the problem solver and everything lies in you. So it's complementary, right? I always think that I wouldn't be where I am in my career corporate wise if I hadn't gone through the experiences that I have gone. And they were bitter sometimes. I'm not telling you it was all roses and exciting. There were challenges that, but that to me was the best learning experience. And I would encourage anybody, and I'm sure all the ladies on this panel would encourage that if you have an idea, no matter big or small it is, no idea is too small actually, go out and explore it. There's nothing wrong with that. The learning you get out of it far surpasses any working experience you could actually or possibly gather in a corporate world.
But Yara, do you feel that, so you made the move from entrepreneurship to the corporate world?
No, in the middle. So I did it in between. So I did corporate, entrepreneur, corporate. So it was.
But do you believe that having some corporate experience helps also, to get to at least be more mature, have access to resources, access to networks before you decide to start your own thing, right?
So it was basically, the negotiation part was very, very helpful for me, right? So because in the corporate world, you're exposed to so many people in different departments, so you don't only understand the field you're in. So I'm a marketing techie. So, but in my position as a marketeer, I had to work with sales, I had to work with engineering, I had to work with the developers in the company because it was tech companies mostly. So that learning experience was basically the foundation that I took into the startup world, and then it's accelerated immensely in these 2 years. And then I went and took back that again to the corporate world. So it's the perfect marriage. If you can do it, if you can sustain it physically, mentally, and emotionally, it's basically the perfect, you know, I say I come with not 15 years of experience. I feel like I come with 30 years of experience because of those 2-3 years that I spent as an entrepreneur. If that
I
makes
think
sense.
we need to be clear that entrepreneurship is not for everyone. I mean, as you said, it takes a big toll on you. Yeah.
Helen, do you disagree? Is entrepreneurship not for everyone?
I think everyone can be entrepreneurial. I think entrepreneurship in terms of actually setting up your own business does not need to be for everyone. And even like through the work that I do, I always say I work on building entrepreneurial mindsets or skills that will make you entrepreneurial, whether you have a job or whether you are an entrepreneur and you start up your own business.
Good
because
point.
when you're in the corporate sector, if you are entrepreneurial, that's how you get ahead. And that's how you move ahead, because you are innovative, you think of different things. You are constantly, you're taking some risks, you're doing all of these things, which is entrepreneurial. But entrepreneurship is definitely not for everyone. And I definitely agree that the corporate sector is, I mean, it doesn't have to be a massive organization, but learning to report to someone, learning how business is run properly and professionally is a game changer for any entrepreneur. So I think when people just go in and start their own business without having had experience of working for someone, I think you're at a disadvantage.
Amal, I want to go back to that question on Reem saying how they need the corporate governance, how they need to instill managing a company and not just managing a product. Now, I, like you, invest at the early stage, right? And so I know that struggle. And so I'm very keen to see your perspective, because it's so hard, right? Because you know their passion, a lot of them as founders, and for us as investors in technology and tech-enabled businesses, their heart is in the product, they're techies. And how, as an investor, do you manage that sort of the thin line of trying to help them build a bigger entity, but not really kill, as Reem was saying, the motivation or the passion, which is just simply a product? How do you do that? Do you do it as a board member? Is it the program? Very keen to know more.
Yeah, so I want to build on two things that will lead to that, which is Yara's point around the discipline at the very early days, and also, you know, what Helen mentioned, which is the mindset, right? Part of what we do with discipline, and so much of it, there comes a resilience. And I'm sure Yara will know how do we manage between changing what we know should happen and the way we know it and all the experience that we gathered through our corporate years. And we know that this is the way it is. And the beauty in innovation is resilience and experimentation. And how do we embed that kind of, you know, space where we allow testing, but it has to be rapid, but I have to learn, because it's unlike the corporate, I have no time. Everything in tech is moving fast. Everything is actually moving forward. Fundraising is happening at massive rates nowadays. So a company can expand faster because they were fundraised over there. They got better talent and all of these stuff. So I think that's part of it, which is understanding how far and how can I be more resilient, and I'll bring it to that. But also, not many entrepreneurs have that mindset of the entrepreneur. They may have an innovative idea, but they still need to build that mindset of like thinking, which I totally agree. Anybody can develop that mindset, but maybe they can't continue moving forward. And that's why we see a lot of entrepreneurial people in the corporate world. They do amazing because, you know, they're able to follow the structure, but also they know how to, you know, work with the system. Now, how do we do it? I think that's the advantage of us and yourself, Dina, in accelerator programs. We come super early. We build relationships with founders. We get close to them, and we know probably sometimes more about their personal life, about the challenges, about what they go through. And we navigate through that within the business, and through the mentorship and the structure of the program, you know, we try to instill, you know, these kind of layers. And I think when you build that early relationships, they listen to you, they listen to the advices, and we open a network. So it's not only what I say as an investor, it's actually the rest of the community. What do they need? If you're fundraising from that market, what are these investors are thinking of? So I think there's layers of that structure that comes naturally, within the program itself, but the most important one and most beautiful, it's the founders that are in the cohort. You can't imagine the impact of another founder who's one step ahead, right? That talks to the founder, and tell them, this is what I've done, and this is what they come to me, oh, they did this, maybe we should explore that. So I think these sessions as well works and goes a long way. And again, there was something that I heard from one of the founders, and I think being an educator before getting into all of that, back in the days, I always want to listen, and I want to just add more of like, I've seen this and that. And I give them the choice, obviously, it's a conversation, and they said, sometimes we feel you're not an investor and we forget, we tell you way too much, way too much. So I go back, Dina, it's that power of getting so early, you can do it. And obviously in my angel investment, it's just by sitting on boards and trying to avail these connections to, what they need to achieve, obviously, at the end of the day.
Funny, speaking of knowing so much about their personal lives, I mean, things are different now, but I remember back in 2011, when we very first launched, and we had a founder who had a really good company, and then he came and said, I have to quit it. And we're like, but why? You're actually doing well. And he's like, because my father-in-law, my future father-in-law does not accept that I don't have a job. And we actually had to walk in and say, okay, I can meet him and try to explain that you're still very successful, even though you don't have a 9-to-5 job. I mean, perceptions on entrepreneurship, thankfully, over the past decade has certainly come a long way. But really, it is, I think entrepreneurship in our part of the world has a lot of challenges and has a lot of difficulties compared to other established markets. And maybe that's the next thing I want to touch upon. Like, how do you feel entrepreneurship, what do you feel are the biggest challenges from your perspectives, different perspectives, do entrepreneurs now face? And the tricky question, do you feel like it's even harder for female entrepreneurs and founders?
I can start. We did a study a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, on the challenges that female entrepreneurs face along the way. And we basically came up with 5 main challenges that they face. Now, one of them is definitely, the point that you mentioned, Dina, and that is basically social values versus career choices. So traditional employment is always more encouraged as a career choice for both men and women. So you can imagine, when women decide to venture into something that is unknown, unrisky, and requires a lot of time and effort. So we see that women are pushed to be very high achievers when they're studying and when they're students, right? So you want them to get the good grades and achieve and get the best education out there. But then when it comes to their career choices or even starting businesses, it's a completely different support system that is there. Their aspirations, they're very much limited by all those restrictive social norms. So you see women continuously needing to defend their career choices, right? Especially if they are high achievers and they want to, build their businesses and scale them and grow them. And the other thing we saw was that women are always perceived that when they are pursuing these career choices, that they're doing it to fill their time with work, as opposed to actually them adding substantial value to that specific activity, right? The other, key issue that we found was, reluctance among investors. And this is not a regional issue. This is really a global issue, because when you see the amount of funding that goes to female startups is ridiculous. I think it's like 4 or 5% in the US, something very. So we see that investors are very reluctant to invest in women startups, and women continuously, they have to challenge the investor expectations regarding their ability to balance basically their roles as mothers, wives, and then as business women as well. This is a clear example with what's happening with Helen now. You very rarely you see a male entrepreneur having to deal with these day-to-day issues. So investors, they presume that women cannot balance these obligations and they cannot be as effective and as efficient as the male counterpart. So they continuously need to explain themselves and defend themselves. And this also affects their ability to reach, other sources of financing as well. I think also the bias in personal laws, the biases in inheritance and women's access to collateral and their ability to build wealth also inhibits their ability or limits their chances to get even, regular funding from banks or other types of financing as well. And we see that men are much closer to the world of money than women are. So they really have to overcome a much larger, let's say, knowledge gap in the area of finances as well. The last point I want to mention is the self-efficacy, right? So venturing into entrepreneurship is risky and requires so much confidence and risk-taking. But because of all those social norms, women tend to be more risk averse and they're not as confident with their choices and their options. And there's always this fear of self-doubt and fear of failure. We see this very prominently among women, especially as the business starts to scale and grow. So yeah, those are generally, there are definitely clear challenges that women face as opposed to men, related to social norms and related to ability to just go out, take off, network, fundraise. Women don't have the liberty to do this, unfortunately.
So I actually want to go from there to Yara and Helen. Helen, one, do you feel like this is, as someone who actually deals with youth at such an early stage prior to cultural norms setting in, do you feel like this is something innate, or is this really, like, how do you see these interactions happening at a younger age? I know we had a prior chat and you said your perfect age is usually the 8 to 15, and that's where you feel like really where you have an influence and an impact. So how do you feel these cultural norms? Are they earlier on? Are they able to be changed? Do you think they do have a ripple effect much later on? How do you see that happening? And then I want to go to Yara and ask, from your experience, was that genuinely quite relevant? Did you feel that push as a female founder?
Very good question, because one of the things that I had never expected or anticipated was that a lot of these biases do exist when kids are really, really young. I'll never forget, I was doing workshops with children that were between the ages of 10 to 14 in a refugee camp in Jordan. And the way that we do our work, the kids come together and they work in teams. And each one of the team members has to have a role within this company that they set up. And the roles range from finance to CEO to marketing. In one of the companies, the girl became the CEO and the boys were the other roles. And one of the boys got really, really upset because, who will mudir? He has to be the CEO. He didn't understand why this was even like an option. And after about 2 days of them coming into the workshop and working together, he understood that the reason why she was the CEO was because she was a better leader and had certain characteristics. And he had better skills when it came to finance. And we were able to change that mindset through just the project and through them working together. So I do believe that it can change. It's just a very difficult bias to change, I think, very, very quickly. It'll take years to change, but I think it's slowly happening. Sometimes I get a little bit, I'll say offended when we talk about, women's rights and things, because I think these are basic human rights. It's not women's rights, it's basic human rights. But then I remember and I realized that these biases do exist, and that like Reem was mentioning, even when it comes to the laws and to the challenges that you face, intrinsically within our systems, these biases aren't going to go away, but we can change mindsets slowly. And that's why I'm so passionate about working with kids, because I feel like you can't always change things the way they are, but you can develop new things and develop new mindsets. And if you educate the young minds, then eventually you can change those biases. Call me an eternal optimist, if you will.
Someone has to be.
Yeah.
So Dina, just one comment on the challenges. I wanted to add one point to Reem's list, is that the lack of female role models is actually another challenge that we face, both in the corporate world and in the startup world, right? So it's a vicious cycle. It becomes a vicious cycle. Less women go up the ladder in the corporate world, more senior positions. You find them, there's no lack of representation in mid-level and entry-level, but because of all the challenges that Reem spoke about, the cultural bias, all of this, they look at going into a career in tech more of a job rather than a career, right? So, and part of this is also the cultural label of tech being labeled as a male-dominant industry. So in our culture, we also think that pursuing a career in something that is perceived as male-dominant labels us as manly, so we tend to steer away from it. The requirements of the tech industry or working in tech, it's very fast-paced, as Amal said as well. So basically, it requires long working hours at times, specifically in leadership positions. It requires a lot of travel, which might not be accepted in our culture if a woman is single. So all these challenges are, and then there's a lack of representation of role models. So fewer and fewer women have, or females have, other female leaders to look up to. In terms of the similarity in the challenges, I can definitely confirm that some of the challenges were faced by me, specifically one story, because example is always the best way to get a point across. I was meeting with some investors, and it's a long process, and everybody knows that you have to meet 100 investors before you land the one. And the question that probably resonated with me the most as I was pitching to a group of investors was, do you think you'll break even? Which I found a little bit, I would say, discouraging as a question, because my male counterparts, because it was an open panel, were asked when will they start making profit, whereas I was addressed of when are you going to break even, assuming that, you know, I have limitations that are based on my...
lower for you.
Huh?
The bar is lower for you.
Yeah, exactly. So, so this, and it is very discouraging, you know, to start with someone who's coming with already self-doubt. As females, we come with self-doubt, we come with our own inhibitions, and to be asked when are you going to be breaking even, it also plays into, maybe I'm not good enough for this. If they don't think I'm gonna, if they think I'm barely, it's like their success criteria for me is breaking even, while the success criteria for my male counterparts is making profit. Finding actually funding, I think the lack of representation in female representation in VCs, just like it is in leadership roles in corporate, there's also very few women. The ladies in the panel are an exception to this rule, but literally there's very few women or female representation in VCs and investors, right? That also, that connection that you make with a female investor stirs some confidence in you when you're addressing a panel that's all male. There's a difference when there's a female sitting there as a co-founder or as an investor. So that also was part of the challenge for me, is that I had not only needed to prove myself, but also needed to prove myself to an audience that already has a lot of perceived ideas about me, what I can do, and what I can bring to the table. Whereas if there was a female there, she would have connected with a lot of, because she made it there. So she knows that I am capable just as much. It has nothing to do with my gender. It has to do with my idea, how I want to execute it. It's that's on the table. So these are tested and tried challenges. You know, the spectrum is very wide, I guess. But equally, there's a spectrum of opportunities as well for us there. Because sometimes I feel like, you know, there's only going up from here for all of us, you know, whether it's investors, entrepreneurs, females in tech, in corporate world, in the startup ecosystem, and so on.
Thank you.
You're right. I mean, Yara, you touched on so many important points that a lot has to be done to celebrate more female role models, to put them out there. It really has massive impact. And the issue of confidence, even the, women who are successful, driven. I speak also for myself. When I was appointed, I was appointed as an independent board member on a bank in Jordan, and I was among the very, very first to, as an independent board member, to sit on the board of a bank. And it was very intimidating for me before attending the first meeting. And I remember just spending, a whole month before the first board meeting, reading, catching up, learning. I had to really ramp up and go very well prepared. And then very quickly, it became clear to me that, what am I doing? Why am I, lashing myself so much?
You've earned it. You've earned your position there.
Earned it, but I was really very harsh on myself in terms of my capability and ability to contribute. And I see this very well. Even, we try to work with the women to sit on boards now in Jordan. They have to tick, like if the requirement, let's say there are 10 requirements, women need to tick the 10 boxes before they feel confident, whereas with men, 3, 4, and they're ready to go and take the world. It is definitely, the issue of confidence is definitely prominent, even among the most outgoing women and women who are determined. So this is something we really need to work on, all of us.
Can I just add something? One of the things that I find is, if a woman is young, she's considered less experienced. Like there's more questions about a woman when she's young versus a woman when she's old, a male when he's young. So talking about kind of leadership positions, etc. A lot of times they might take risks with younger men, because, in terms of putting them in these positions. But when you're young and you're a woman, it becomes a much different equation. I've had, in the past, I would say 2 weeks, I've had at least 7 calls with different boards. And on those calls, I've only had 1 female on any of those boards, or the representatives of those boards. So I just find it very disheartening, I must say.
So there's so many topics that have come up. Amal, you've been quiet, and I'll get to you. but
I'm scared now.
No. You're hiding. You're taking a corner, avoiding that conversation. But there's a lot of heat on you and I as the investors.
No, I don't think so. Maybe we see the other side. I think we're in the side where we see the excitement, and I wanted to hear more because I feel privileged to work with female entrepreneurs. And the way we look at it, I look at them as no less. I actually see a woman who took that step is actually a plus, because the minute she took that step, she knows what she has to actually organize or actually sort out in her life. She made that decision and went out public. So I see it as a huge opportunity for us to invest in these women. And on the other hand, again, Dina, we see the excitement in the female entrepreneurs. I mean, in the last cohort, we had 3 amazing entrepreneurs with different profiles and personas and different ages and different social profiles, and some in biotech, some in NFTs and crypto, some in actually edtech. So I think I'm surrounded by those wonderful ones, but I do agree with Yara. We want more stories and highlights probably on those. We want to see them more going and speaking. Women always look for conviction. They don't want to bring something that is not good enough, right? And that delays us. And I actually portray it on myself. If you asked me 15 or 10 years ago, would you be investing? Or you're going to be, I don't think that was even in my mind. But I had great examples on my way and my path. And every time it was a step, I would take a step or 2. And sometimes I would jump because it was easier to jump at that time. So I think that's part of the story, with all these challenges, there are ones that are making it and we want to make them super more visible. And there's the role we play. and the role that we give back. How do we instill that confidence? How do we demystify the investment world? How do we demystify the startup story to these women? How do we tell them how to take those steps? I think there is a role that we still yet need to play, bigger in whatever is happening, especially that today, the pool of opportunity is so huge, so big. I mean, today is probably, we say, even in the MENA region, it's one of the best times, to actually start a venture for so many actually reasons. So I think we're in the very extreme optimism of the spectrum, that sometimes maybe we need to be reminded of the challenges that do exist. I am very aware that these challenges do exist, and how do we really, expand that pool and make it, basically make an impact, where we change more of these, challenges as well.
Yeah. No,
I ask both of you, Amal and Dina, as investors. Yeah. So, I mean, the challenge is, there are challenges at the early stages, definitely, but they're far more pronounced once the company starts to scale, right? So it's completely different dynamic, and women, the entrepreneurs, face far graver challenges. So you're at the very early stage. What are your, what do you do to continue supporting women? So we see more scale-ups. We have, let's say, we see many, and also concentrated in certain sectors, more in the edtech, or let's say traditional female sectors. We don't see many women in I don't know, deep IT or deep tech. Or agtech or medtech, I don't know. So they continue to be in traditional sectors. They're at the early stage. So what can you do as investors to ensure that there's more diversification in terms of sector representation, and also that you are seeing them through to the very next stages as well?
So actually, it's Reem is taking over the moderator.
No,
and I'm very happy. But actually, Reem, it's quite interesting because maybe I have a slightly contrarian view, right? And I think it's a question that I wanted to throw at Amal, in that I actually, as Fast Subs, we actually have a mandate by our LPs to invest in more females. We have a target that we need to, even if all social impact and humanitarian, and me as a female aside, it's actually a physical mandate that I have to comply with. But I have to admit, the most common, and that's to throw it out there for everyone, but the most common statistic we heard is the number of female founded startups that had received investments versus the number of male founded investments that have received investments. But my question is that we need to take it a lot earlier, right? We need to look at the number of females that have applied to tech schools and computer science and STEM schools versus the number of male students that have applied to these schools. And then we need to go a little bit more downstream and say, how many of my applications have been female founded versus how many have been male founded? And this is the trickier part. And I think it actually touches upon what you're saying, Reem, in the sense that I think we look at the end result, whereas the game is actually a lot earlier. And it's in my opinion, I think it's an amalgamation of a lot of points raised. It's female confidence, it's culture and society, and it sometimes is just, it is female presenting themselves, and maybe that's something that we also collectively need to, as investors or support system or role models, work on. And that I think females see creating an ambitious pitch as deceiving, whereas a male would say, no, but these are my ambitions. And these minor differences, the question that comes up is, do we change how we, so I, for example, as an investor, I actually hardly ever have a direct conversation rather than a standard application that everyone fills. Now, do I change that application to be more suitable to a female psyche? Or should I say that, no, we need to teach females that it's the same application that I've given to a male and a female and they need to know how to respond to these questions appropriately, or that makes them competitive to male. Now, I'm definitely not removing all the other challenges that we get along the way, but I think there's something that has to be done more upstream in terms of how do we set the female psyche better? How do we get more females interested in the tough challenges? But also, I think something that you've said very, very interestingly is how do we demystify startups? Because sometimes I think they just think it's actually such a beast that they have to face, whereas actually, come to think of it, it could be for most females a lot more exciting and malleable, because I work at my own pace, I work at my own times, I can completely manage my schedule rather than a corporate that expects me to be logged in 9 to 5, whereas as an entrepreneur, I could work after I've put the kids to sleep 9 to midnight, right? And so I think these are a lot of things that we need to sort of address upstream before we come to say how many females are getting funded. So I think that's sort of my take on things. And I don't know if, Amal, you see it differently. And actually, I think that females, once they've started scaling, they have that confidence. The way I see it is that it's actually the earlier days that they have so much self-doubt. And then there's that kick of confidence that comes in when they've cracked it, and they start getting the hang of how a male companion would have pitched that deck versus how they would have pitched that story as well. And so I don't know, I'm very happy to hear your point.
I'll tell everyone. So I was talking to a startup who's fundraising, a female founder actually, and she said, I only closed the $1 million, in seed stage. I was like, excuse me? I said, can you repeat that? Only 1 million. So there was that one only, million. I said, that's big, here in that is not only, that is actually a good amount of, you've done amazing actually fundraising. So there's a lot of training that we still have to do in terms of how do we address, also how we portray ourselves, in general, obviously, and for female founders. But going back to your point, it's the application and the demystification part. In the past 10 years, I've done a lot of ecosystem activities, talks, go sit, in female campus, and just sit with them, and students in universities, ITs, call it, whatever the sector, just spend that time. And the reason I stick to the, changing that mindset, it's just about seeing someone who's like you, who's close to you, who has similar, maybe cultural traits, who has done it, or told them, what are the steps that are needed? Because again, it's the association that they grew up with, so how do you really change that? So we need to do, I think, more of that. And we started doing at 500, we're doing these roadshows, everyone looks at it maybe as a VC, and it becomes kind of like, are we ready or not? So we try to do a lot of reach out, go sit in co-working spaces, answer questions and all of these stuff. And really just be lenient in the way we absorb these questions and explain how things, and there is no dumb question, when you're coming to build a startup, because nobody knows it all, right? There's always something that's going to be different and changeable. In terms of applications, I don't see a lot of differences, because again, what are we asking in the applications, right? We're asking about the idea, we're asking about tractions, we're asking about all of these stuff. And sometimes we actually ask if they have, we look at the number of female employees that they have. So we measure ESGs as well. So diversity is key. And what I'm noticing, I actually was talking to a friend this morning, she said a lot of the founders, when they're fundraising internationally, if they don't see, female in their team, in the management team, if they don't see that in their cap table, it becomes a kind of a flag maybe sometimes. So I think there's so much that we need to do, yes, in terms of the outreach, but in terms of how do we really portray that? And again, the sectors, I think this has to go early on, because I can't change it when it reaches the application stage, right? But it has to come. So one of my last founders, Twin Health, she studied MRI actually analysis, and she's a PhD holder. Her product is a SaaS model in MRI analytics via utilizing artificial intelligence. And she can diagnose diabetes through masses that they see in the MRI. Amazing. That was driven by her studies. That couldn't have been actually happening if she didn't go through that years and years of that. So again, I do agree there's a gap that needs to be played at the education, phase. but there is a lot in terms of outreach and in terms of education, and there's the way we forward, and we actually as investors, how do we address diversity and how vocal are we, about, wanting to see more female founders, more female in the C-level actually of the company.
Helen, the question, do you feel that at an early age, are you able to track from the people that go through BizWorld and your programs, how females then are able to proceed to apply to which schools, or if that entrepreneurial mindset is able to affect the pool of females that grow to become entrepreneurs?
Unfortunately, because of the age that I work with, they're not old enough. They're not old enough for us to be able to kind of have that data. But what I will say is what I see in schools is more and more. So I do a lot of work with the government here in the UAE. I do work with one of the biggest education institutions called GEMS Education. And I work with kids starting from KG all the way until grade 12. And a couple of 3 or 4 years ago, actually 4 years ago, I remember we did a competition and there were only 2 girls. Now there are a lot more. So I think in terms of their interest in kind of stepping up and doing things is definitely growing. I'm definitely seeing more. It's no longer a stark kind of shocking scene when you walk into a workshop or you walk into a class, because you're seeing more and more girls are taking part. But I think one of the things that I do want to say is that sometimes because of the cultural implications, I think there are also a lot of women that might not necessarily want it. So going back to the point of how many actually apply, how many are coming forward, I think there are a lot of women that don't necessarily want that as well. And I think we tend to forget that because, I mean, you sit there and you kind of fight this fight or have these discussions, but then if push comes to shove, there are women that don't necessarily want that. And so I think that's also another piece to the puzzle, because there are social norms, there are kind of psychological things that women are driven by that are different. So
and do you feel like this is very particular to the region?
Yeah, I think it's not very particular, but I do find that the region probably has it a little bit more than other places. But I will say, I mean, one of the biggest examples was the pandemic, right? Who were the ones that were the most impacted by the need to stay at home and had to quit their jobs? And it was the women, because if you were to look at who was earning, when a family is faced with the choice of who's going to lose their income, it would be the male is earning more. And so it's a better option for her to quit. Who's going to be able to help with the kids with homeschooling? It would be her. And this was not a regional issue. This was global. And this is what I'm saying. It was a global issue. So I think, and that's one of the signs that you can see that it's not just a regional issue. I have sisters that live in the US. I have nieces that have graduated from some of the top universities, the Cornells and the Fordham, and one of them is an engineer, and she is the only female amongst all of her colleagues that goes out onto sites. And this is in the US. This is in New York. And I mean, I don't think it's a regional thing. I think it's a global thing. I think the psychological parts are also a global thing. And I don't want to take up too much time, but one of the things that you will notice is, I think 15 years ago, there was this whole movement about women's equality, kind of, we need to be men, like, are not better than us, etc. Right? Now you're finding more and more women speaking along the lines of, no, we are equal. I still want to be a woman, and let the man be the man, type of thing. And whatever that means is different for everyone, different cultures and societies, but you're hearing more and more women being kind of advocating for embracing your femaleness, if you will.
You have it. Fantastic. So I think we're running tight on time. And so just before we wrap up, I'd like to sort of ask each one of you for a minute to sort of, if you have imparting advice for every female founder, what would you personally advise her, and maybe different experiences that you would say, this is a pitfall, avoid it, or this is or just simply, don't worry, just keep going, you're doing just fine. So I'd love to sort of pass over to each one sort of with their imparting wisdom as we wrap up this lovely session.
Reem will go.
Amal? Fantastic.
I'm nominating Reem. Can you hear us, Reem?
I'm sorry, my internet has been unstable throughout. So do you want me to start, Dina?
Anyone, so Amal, Reem, whoever.
My advice is, hello?
Yeah, since we have you, you start.
Okay. So definitely, look, my advice is you have to work hard, believe in yourself, in your abilities. Don't let anybody discourage you. If you're set, if you're set to do something, go after it. Ask for help along the way. Learn, and continue learning about everything, A to Z's of running a business. Educate yourself, get help as much as you can, and just go for it. You can do it. Yeah.
I agree with Reem. I think the most challenging part is asking for help. We think that because we're going into the entrepreneurial world, we need to do it on our own. Get out of your shell, for sure. Approach people. There's nothing wrong with calling up a friend that you haven't spoken to 2 years ago for 2 years, but you know that they're in the VC world or the investor world, or they've made it as an entrepreneur. Reach out, meet as many people. For introverts, this is a little bit challenging, but like I said, you can polish those extrovert skills and get out there, and enjoy it along the way, because entrepreneurship is a very lonely journey. Specifically, if you're a single founder, it can get very lonely. Try not to isolate yourself. Go out to these meetups, go and meet people. Enjoy it. The more fun, the more you are entitled to actually succeed in it.
Yeah, I want just, this is what I wrote, and I've been asked for mentorship. It's because
so
I think
clearly that's key.
It's actually what really stops a lot of people, and I noticed that they're shy to ask whether they're male or female. But I think they'll be surprised that they can get to people that they would have never dreamed of. They would answer them, and in today's world, with all the social, media channels, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all of these stuff, you will be surprised of how people will give you a strong advice. Just my advice, when you ask for help, be specific, especially if it's someone you're busy. Give me just 3 or 4 lines. This is what I want to know, right? Because sometimes I get, hi, how are you? I said the how are you is actually gone because I'm going to the next one, and I appreciate they ask. So be specific in your ask. You will get a lot of support and help. 2, if they're not the ones that will help you, I'll always ask for referrals. Who else can I speak to? Would you recommend someone else, that I can go to? These are like simple tips and tricks, of how to go about, ice breaking anything. 3rd one, if you're meeting someone in person, I always say Google the people or the speakers in a conference or whatever, and direct a personal question. If they're big fans of a certain sector, you can always stand out in a room by asking that question, right? So do the homework, understand them very well, and that will take you a long way. And again, the entrepreneurial game is all about customers' behaviors. If you think product wins alone, products never wins alone. There's so many products that died. Corporate shows it, startups shows it. The whole world will actually attest to that. Where the customers' behaviors are going, where are they changing? How do we understand how to solve problems? Trust me, that is the key for every successful venture. That's number 1 rule. What is the problem you're solving? Which actually, consumer is going to use it? And how do you change and iterate over the way? And maybe the other side, we always say, follow the technologies and the techies. What are developers thinking of today? Because now with Web3, who would have thought, you'll be buying a land in a metaverse kind of world. So always think of like the new technologies that are happening that could be threatening the traditional. So those are like just few things that I always see them, but just keep up those in your mind. I think it's a good start to think.
Fantastic advice. actually for everyone, male and female, for all entrepreneurs out there. Thank you, Amal.
Thanks.
Helen?
I'm going to go on a slightly different path and say just be authentic. There's nothing worse than pretending to be something you're not. I think people can see through it, investors can see through it, clients can see through it, customers can see through it. Be authentic. I'm not saying you have to dish out all your personal life to everyone, but don't try to be something you're not. If you are, if you show your vulnerabilities, sometimes it's not a bad thing. So I think just own being you is what I would say.
Thank you, ladies. This has been absolutely fun. And this really has been fantastic advice to everyone out there. I think females, males, and entrepreneurs, which I know they have a tough journey anyhow. All of them have a tough journey. So I wish them all the luck. And thank you again for today. I really thoroughly enjoyed this lovely, warm conversation. So thank you all so much. I'd like to hand over now to Mr. Abdulaziz Qambar, CEO of the Arab ICT Union, for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Dina. And thank you very much for all the distinguished speakers. I think it was an exciting session. Just to correct it, I'm the CEO of BTECH, which is a Bahrain technology society, companies society in Bahrain. And we are partners as well with the Arab ICT Union. I think over the course of the last 2 days, including today, we saw around 50 Arab women speaking from over 20 Arab countries to share their experiences and to collaborate with each other. And we came across amazing success stories, from digital banking initiatives to understanding them that some key women in the world created the foundation of the digital tools that we've been using today in our digital era. For example, on day one on the keynote session, we understood that one of the women, I don't think she is an Arab, but we understand that she is a woman at the end. She created the graphical user interfaces. If it was not for that, we don't have today applications. We don't have today anything of what Steve Jobs or Apple or Google or any of the big names created. So it shows how much women are influencing our industry. So I would like to thank all of you for an amazing journey that we had together. And we have a simple poll that we would like to bring it forward, if you don't mind, for all the attendees to participate with us, because this will share your sights and your views on what we want to do next. So I'll start with the 4 questions one by one. So this question states that, would you like to see a continuous series for this event that's gathered the participants every 3 months to share and continue the outcome and the collaboration? So I'll just wait a few seconds to get the answer. Very interesting. Almost 100% is yes. Okay. Then we'll go to the next one. Would you like this event to be made on annual basis, on a hybrid model? Hybrid, we mean that you can physically meet each other in a specific location, and also we allow the online participant to attend this event. Wow, very strong yes. Thank you very much for that. And the third question is, do you like to see more university college students attending and participating in such events? Okay, excellent. Almost around 90% that is yes. They want to see more students from universities participating. Last but not least, if we are continuing this events for the future, what are the topics that you would like to see in this event? Okay. So very interesting. I think this answers back to Yara, to Amal, to Dina, to all of you, that majority of the people, they want the startups, okay? So they want what you guys been discussing today on the startup and the success journey for the tech startups that is led and funded by women. With that, thank you very much for an amazing journey. And thank you for having us all on board with you as attendees, wherever you are in any country you are. I wish you all the best, inshallah. Ma salama.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.